Welcome to the VMblog's 2021 Mega Series, where today we're diving into the topic of Kubernetes and containers. And to educate us on the topic, we're joined by Martez Reed, the Director of Technical Marketing at Morpheus Data. Welcome.
Glad to be a part.
So today we're here to talk about the subject of Kubernetes. Can you explain how your company defines it and how you look at it?
Yeah, at a high level, the way I usually talk about Kubernetes is around container orchestration. So it's the idea that the thing we really want is containers and provides portability and all the advantages. But at a semblance of scale, we need a way to orchestrate those workloads across multiple nodes for redundancy, high availability, all the things we know and love about things like public cloud, things like VMware vSphere, which enables us to run workloads in a highly available manner. And for us, we think of it as another method or model in which applications can be deployed and run. So similar to virtual machines that we know and love, bare metal, serverless, all these things are ways for us to be able to provide applications that ultimately deliver value for the business in terms of a service that end consumers can consume.
Now, there's always some pros and cons to any technology, but are there any specific drawbacks to using containers that people should be aware of?
Yeah, there's for me, one of the biggest ones is the ecosystem that comes along with it. So we love containers, we love the portability, we love the speed, but the challenge becomes at an enterprise scale, all the things that come along with deployment of an image registry, security scanning for containers, understanding just the general constructs of Kubernetes. One of the things that people have known and love is Kelsey Hightower's Kubernetes the hard way. The challenge becomes, while the Kubernetes has gotten a lot easier over the years, it's still complex and still difficult for IT administrators, developers to understand all the nuance, all the complexity. And the other thing becomes, when organizations adopt Kubernetes, there's as I mentioned, an ecosystem that comes along with it. So now I'm managing potentially bare metal. I'm still managing, depending upon the organization, mainframes. I'm managing Kubernetes. I'm looking at serverless. So there's all these different paradigms from a management perspective that come along with trying to operate these models.
And so how might Kubernetes and container tools impact a company's staffing and talent strategy?
Yeah, it's along the same lines of what we talk about the ecosystem, a scenario where as a business, I have to then go out and acquire talent or hire talent that has the skills of the Kubernetes, the DevOps, and all the cloud native things that we talk about. But for a lot of large enterprise organizations, there's still a need for skills for VMware and traditional networking, traditional storage. And the challenge becomes, what resource do I then go out to try and acquire from a talent perspective to say, you know what, we want to potentially move forward with Kubernetes, but I still have to maintain the word that's often used is legacy environment. But at the end of the day, it's still providing the business value. So the challenge is being able to have a scenario where I'm able to get individuals that want to work with Kubernetes and containers and all the newest and coolest things, but I still have to keep the lights on as a business. And so where do I invest resources, even from a training and enablement perspective for my organization? Is it all of my vSphere admins now need to go get Kubernetes certified as part of our initiative to move towards Kubernetes and still maintain their current skill set? So that's often the challenge that we see with both from the business side as well as the actual IT professional side. Is, as an IT professional, how do I learn and juggle all these new and different skills? And then from a monetary perspective, understanding that maybe as a vSphere admin, my monetary value to an organization isn't as great as it would be for a DevOps engineer or an engineer that understands and knows Kubernetes. So I've got the challenge of, do I look to learn all the coolest and newest things and run into the conflict from a business standpoint where maybe I might not get the opportunity at my current company to learn all the newest and coolest technology with the Kubernetes to further my career from a monetary perspective. And so that creates that friction of organizations trying to keep their IT professionals in-house.
And where does your company and product lines fit into the Kubernetes space?
Yeah. For us, we see Kubernetes as I mentioned, another computing model. For Morpheus, we're a self-service platform that IT operations teams can leverage to be able to provide self-service capability to developers, to business users from a consumption perspective as well, if there's a technology interface that needs to be happen. And so where I see us fit in the Kubernetes space is just a natural extension of, instead of requesting virtual machines or interacting with virtual machines, I'm now interacting with Kubernetes clusters and being able to now request resources in a Kubernetes cluster via a self-service fashion. So what it really focuses on is helping to reduce that challenge and that friction of, yes, I want to go to Kubernetes and take all the advantages of Kubernetes, but the challenge as an organization is we don't really want all the toil and all the challenges that come along with Kubernetes. So Morpheus is able to help simplify that process by integrating with things like AWS EKS, Azure's AKS for provisioning of Kubernetes clusters, managed Kubernetes clusters in the public cloud, as well as being able to deploy Kubernetes clusters on-prem.
And, VMblog, one of the things we like to talk about are futures. Based on your expertise, what are some of the current Kubernetes trends that your company is seeing in the market?
One of the big things that we're seeing is the idea of being, as I mentioned, having organizations that are in the scenario of wanting to adopt Kubernetes, adopting Kubernetes, but also still having workloads that are still based in bare metal, still based in virtual machines. So we're seeing a lot of impetus with that, with things like KubeVirt, is the idea of how can I sort of co-manage those or manage them in a single homogeneous manner. The other thing for me along those lines becomes, how as IT organizations are you able to manage the provisioning and workload management of both containers running in Kubernetes as well as virtual machines? So for us, from a platform perspective, we have the capability to tap into the provisioning capabilities we already have with virtual machines, but also to be able to interface with the Kubernetes cluster management. The other big thing we're starting to see is the need for cluster management of, let's say, tens or hundreds of disaggregate Kubernetes clusters that may be running some flavor of public cloud managed Kubernetes, as well as a Rancher, an OpenShift, a VMware Tanzu, and being able to wrangle all of those Kubernetes clusters in a way that's meaningful for the organization to be able to continue to consume Kubernetes at the pace at which they would like.
Now, one of the big concerns for IT is security, obviously. So how does the popularity of containers and Kubernetes change how enterprises should approach security concerns?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it dramatically shifts what IT organizations have been doing from a security perspective, even similar to what public cloud has done. In a lot of organizations, you go in and security professionals have gotten used to virtual machines, bare metal, dealing with those constructs, understanding how to harden those, how to secure those. But with containerization in Kubernetes, there's this whole new paradigm of how things are operated and how they work together. And so now security professionals are now having to, in essence, level up or understand how to secure Kubernetes clusters, what a secure container looks like, all these different best practices. And really what it's also starting to do for the organization is placing greater focus on how developers can help with securing workloads and ensuring that they're following best practices as more things are being provided in a self-service fashion to developers, as well as a lot of organizations are in a lot of ways starting to let go of the stranglehold from a central IT perspective that they've traditionally had, and allowing disparate teams to take greater ownership of their IT operational needs.
Now, Martez, you've talked a lot about the Kubernetes, and we've discussed a lot of the A to Z stuff, the problems and challenges and whatnot. Without putting you on the spot too much, could you talk maybe about Morpheus? Give us what makes you different from your competitors in the market, or why would somebody who's out there looking at this type of stuff, why would they prefer your solution to those provided by others in the industry?
Yeah. So a lot of what I've talked about, even in terms of the Morpheus platform, so a lot of our key focus is on workload lifecycle management, is what I typically refer to it as. And so that workload may be bare metal, it may be virtual machine, it may be workload running in Kubernetes. Helping facilitate the governed management of that is a critical point for me. The idea that we can get to Kubernetes or even a public cloud world where we can just spin up machines and not have to worry about integrating with all the things that we've come accustomed to in IT, whether it's the CMDB or IPAM or a lot of these different interconnected touch points for provisioning a production workload, not necessarily a dev box or a box I throw in Sandbox where I can just spin up an EC2 instance and that's it. It's the scenario of how can I interconnect all these pieces. The other aspect becomes our automation and orchestration capability. So as I mentioned with workload lifecycle management, being able to provision, decommission, all these things, there are those touch points that you need to leverage automation with. And automation and orchestration have become a critical point of need for IT organizations looking to move faster to handle the demands of the business. And then the last thing that we commonly focus on and have a capability around is costing and analytics. And so for me, those are three key components when we start to talk about Kubernetes and managing things in a heterogeneous environment where there's some Kubernetes, there's some virtual machines, there's some bare metal, and being able to, one, stand up and provision Kubernetes clusters, and then be able to tie automation onto the back end of the cluster provisioning. So it's one thing to stand up a Kubernetes cluster, it's another to then tie it into all the different components in your environment, whether it be something like an Argo CD for a GitOps management methodology or style, or it's tying into existing constructs like a CMDB or other components in your environment. Then we get to ongoing management of Kubernetes cluster. One of the things is, as I mentioned, once again, tying into our automation orchestration capabilities to be able to automate and run those different tasks for the management of your Kubernetes clusters within the platform, integration and support for CNCF compliant Kubernetes clusters, whether it be OpenShift or Tanzu or Rancher. For me, the idea of a world where there's going to be one particular flavor or distribution of Kubernetes in an enterprise environment that may be running 100 or 1,000 Kubernetes clusters, to me isn't feasible. It's one of the things that IT has always had, that sprawl of different platforms. And really what it enables is the best tool or the best platform for the specific use case. And then the last thing becomes that consumption model to where we're looking more and more and seeing developers not wanting to dig into the weeds of the Kubernetes on a day-to-day perspective, because that's not really providing the business value. Yeah, it's great to know YAML, and it's great to know all how do I interface with my Kubernetes clusters and work with Kubernetes clusters, but really what gives the business or provides the business value is the service that ultimately is provided by those containers running in Kubernetes that provides a website or provides a web service that an end user can consume and is willing to pay for.
Now, we've talked about some of the trends in Kubernetes and some of the futures, but what does the future of Kubernetes look like? What are things that we have to look forward to ahead?
Yeah, so one of the things that has been an interesting point of conversation is kind of back to the point I just made about developers not necessarily wanting to go full all in on the knobs and the bells and the whistles of Kubernetes to understand those constructs. We're starting to see more and more abstraction layers where I can simply define what it is that I want from a Kubernetes or really a containerization development perspective, where I have my application, I know my application is going to be containerized, and how can I simplify the process of it then running somewhere, whether that is public cloud, whether that is on-prem Kubernetes, or ultimately whether it is Kubernetes at all as a general construct. That's the thing we've traditionally seen over the years is those abstraction layers on top of whether it's bare metal of how can I now run a virtualization platform on top of the bare metal to help abstract that? How can I then abstract the virtualization layer? And so we're continuing to, one might say, climb further and further to the higher level constructs, which is similar to what we've seen even with other aspects of technology, whether it is programming, where we moved from assembly to a lot of these higher level programming languages to help, number one, reduce the need for understanding all of the exact nuances of things like memory management to a point where, for me, even as a former sysadmin, being able to dig into the bits and code that I'm willing to dig into and provide something of value, as opposed to understanding how to manage memory and all these things of garbage collection and all the lower level constructs that ultimately derails me from providing value that I need for the business.
And then before we kind of wrap things up, I was hoping, is there a way you can show a demo of how Morpheus, works within this world of Kubernetes?
Yeah, we can definitely jump into a demo and see the capabilities of the platform around Kubernetes.
Great.
All right, let's take a look at Kubernetes in the Morpheus platform. So where I'm at in the platform is clusters. And so for us, this is a way to be able to provision clusters, whether it is in AKS or EKS. In this particular demo right here, I've got a pre-provisioned Kubernetes cluster. And so what we see here is the platform's capability to be able to manage multiple clusters. And so it can be an existing Kubernetes cluster that you import, or brownfield Kubernetes. It can be, as I mentioned, the provisioning of AKS clusters, EKS clusters. Out of the box, we also include a Kubernetes cluster layout, as we would term them, is a way to just out of the box provision a Kubernetes cluster that is CNCF conformant and ready to go. So let's double click into this cluster to see what we can do from a management perspective of the Kubernetes cluster. One of the things we see right off the bat is costing associated with the Kubernetes cluster. Morpheus platform includes costing for public clouds as well as on-prem environments as part of the platform. And so getting visibility around cost consumption of Kubernetes clusters is one of the big things we're starting to see in the market. In addition to that, we've also got some of the standard performance metrics that one would imagine from a platform such as Morpheus to be able to get insights into the performance of the Kubernetes cluster. Number of masters, number of workers, start to get visibility into what's running in the Kubernetes cluster just at a glance. So if we scroll down, one of the things we recently added in our latest release was the ability to run Kubernetes commands right from the console. And so one of the things I often run is just the git nodes. And so instead of dropping down to the CLI or trying to figure out where my credentials are or trying to navigate some of the challenges of Kubernetes clusters, operations teams can come into the Morpheus UI and interact and interface with the Kubernetes cluster. Number of different options. One of the big things we also added in the latest release of the Morpheus platform was additional visibility into native Kubernetes objects. So things like service accounts, roles, role bindings, being able to then view the granular detail of those constructs within the UI. And so it's not me remembering what's the kubectl command to describe a particular role binding. It's coming in here, clicking on it, viewing additional information about that. So the metadata, things like the config, also just simply reviewing or viewing the raw YAML that would be associated with the given object. So we can see as part of the Morpheus platform, in this case, we provisioned to a vSphere environment in my lab that has two nodes, one's a master, one's a worker, but being able to double click into those, take advantage of all the capabilities that the Morpheus platform provides outside of the Kubernetes construct itself, to where I could then go to these nodes, run maintenance tasks, get granular visibility in terms of the performance of those nodes themselves. So what it really starts to provide is a robust platform for especially deploying and managing Kubernetes clusters in an on-prem environment, but also for those that are not using or taking advantage of managed Kubernetes clusters for various reasons, being able to deploy to the 20 plus clouds that the Morpheus platform supports via Kubernetes, having those in a centralized and unified platform to take advantage of those capabilities. So there are a number of different constructs. We can start to handle the troubleshooting aspects of Kubernetes natively via the platform. So if I had a workload that had an issue with its health, I could then go to the status tab and see, okay, this particular pod or this service or this deployment didn't start for this given reason. I can come right into the Morpheus UI and see what that given reason is, as opposed to remembering what as I mentioned before, what the kubectl command is to get the status information about a pod, a deployment, a service, an endpoint, whatever it might be, and get that understanding right within the UI. This is what the problem is. This is how I can potentially help to start alleviate that. And as I mentioned, going into the control section, being able to potentially run a command to help remediate that issue all within the native UI itself. So one of the other things I want to touch on is we've got a number of different clusters, as I mentioned, but being able to add those external Kubernetes clusters. So it's as simple as specifying a group in Morpheus construct, specifying a cloud, and then associating a name with it. So we can go just putting in some demo information, and the information that it asks is the URL or the API endpoint for the Kubernetes cluster and the API token. And then at that point, it then populates the Kubernetes UI or the Morpheus UI with the Kubernetes cluster to be able to then start to manage that brownfield or existing Kubernetes cluster right within the UI. So this has kind of been a quick walkthrough of the capabilities that the Morpheus platform provides with Kubernetes.
Well, thanks for that great demo. Where can people go if they want to find out more information about Morpheus and some of the stuff you talked about today?
Yeah, so a great place to go is morpheusdata.com to get information about the platform and capabilities itself. Also to view as a landing page for videos that we have on YouTube, as well as upcoming webinars about topics like Kubernetes, Ansible, Terraform, all these different things that are the IT landscape is really hot about.
It was a pleasure speaking with you, and we look forward to speaking with you again.
It's a pleasure being a part.
All right. Thanks, Martez.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more from our cloud technology partners, please hit the like button and subscribe. And if you want to get notified next time we post a video, please hit the subscribe and the bell notification. Very important.